Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. 3 terrorist attacks have happened in France over the past 18 months, leaving over 200 people dead, drawing great anger and condemnations from around the world. And almost at the same time, a coup attempt took place in Turkey Sunday night. Will the growing political uncertainty of this country add to the unpredictability of its membership with the European Union? How do we look at the future of the European Union without the United Kingdom? And what will be the political and economic fallout of the Brexit? To discuss these and other issues, I'm happy to be joined here in this edition of Dialogue by Monsieur de Villepin, former French Prime Minister. He also talked about the implications of the latest ruling on the South China Sea. But before we start the interview, let's look at this.
Dominique de Villepin is a French diplomat and politician. He served as Prime Minister of France from 2005 to 2007. Prior to that, de Villepin had been appointed Foreign Minister by French President Jacques Chirac at the beginning of his second term in 2002. During this time, de Villepin made international headlines with a speech at the UN in which he voiced his country's opposition to the war in Iraq in 2003. His international reputation was made overnight. In 2004, he was France's Interior Minister. He took a firm stand against illegal immigration and worked to counter the growth of radical Islamic fundamentalism. Throughout his career, de Villepin has worked to formulate strategies and find solutions to problems and conflicts. Since de Villepin resigned as Prime Minister in 2007, he has remained a prominent voice on foreign intervention and its alternatives. De Villepin has extensive influence in the international political arena. He is a formidable speaker with a sharp intellect and wit and is in great demand at prestigious events worldwide. De Villepin also has a creative and passionate side, which comes through in his many books of poetry. He has written several historical and political essays, together with a study of Napoleon Bonaparte.
Welcome to Dialogue, Monsieur de Villepin.
Thank you so much.
What can you tell us about the latest response from President Hollande to the lorry attack in Nice?
Well, unfortunately, it is a tragic attack. We have almost 100 people, men, women, children, that have been dead in such an attack. And it has been the third attack against France in the last 18 months. So it is something that creates a lot of fear and of course, strong resentment among the French population. The question is, how can we change such tragic events? Of course, taking more security measures, but we are yet already in a state of emergency. We need also to find a better cooperation with our neighbors. European Union should get more together in order to be able to assess and to monitor the intelligence in such difficult moments. And we should have, I think, a better cooperation with the world community against terrorism. Terrorism is not just targeting France. Terrorism is targeting almost all the countries, and we should not forget that 80% of the victims of terrorism are in Muslim countries. All the countries of the Security Council had been victims of terrorism, all the P5 countries, the US, China, including Russia, London. So it is a concern for all of us. So this is something in which we should really increase our cooperation. We should also think about the consequences of military intervention. We have to face the fact that the intervention in Afghanistan, the intervention in Iraq, the intervention in Libya, not only they have not stopped terrorism, but they have increased the risk of terrorism. So I think we should be very careful when we speak about the use of force. Of course, we can imagine that through a military intervention, through the coalition, we might be able to strike strongly against Daesh in Syria and in Iraq. But this is not going to stop terrorism. Terrorism will grow somewhere else. If we want to stop terrorism, we need to address the issue of failed states. Terrorism is opportunistic. It takes advantage of the situation of failed state in Iraq, failed state in Syria, failed state in Yemen or in Libya. So we should address this issue by finding political solution. That means world cooperation. Cooperation between the US, Europe, Russia, China. We have lacked this cooperation, and we have lacked political imagination in the way to combine our forces to create more stable regimes in this country. And that's why I had, in 2003, before the American intervention in Iraq, such doubts about the policy of regime change. You change a regime, but what do you have next? Next, you have terrorism, you have instability, you have difficulty. So, a global political cooperation between our countries in order to address this question of failed states, to reconstruct these states, to address the needs of the population. How can we stop terrorism in Syria and in Iraq or in Yemen without addressing the question of the Sunni tribe, the Sunni population, which had been rejected by the Iraqi regime and that are in a situation of not being part inclusively of these countries. So we need inclusive policies. We need to address the future of this population if we want to solve the question of terrorism.
Muslim migrants in their thousands have settled in most of the European countries, particularly those of the European Union. And the rise of far-right movement suggests clearly that these terrorist attacks have somehow been caused by Islamic extremists. And therefore, the question is about the prospects of the Schengen Agreement and the spirit of it. Do you think this process of regional economic integration and indeed political union eventually will be seriously undermined as a result? And this has somehow contributed to the Brexit itself.
Well, I think it is a challenge for the European institutions. Of course, we need to adapt the Schengen institution. We need to keep the principle of free circulation because that's part of the legacy and it's a very important element of European prosperity. We should not undermine such a policy. But of course, we have to take into account the new challenges, the new risk. We have 2.2 million refugees in Turkey. Any new crisis in the region might send new refugees in Europe. So, of course, we have a problem and we need to address this issue. So, trying to strengthen the tools that we have created, for example, Frontex, try to have a common police at the borders, try to increase our capacity to monitor the borders at the limits of Europe. That's what is needed. So I don't think it's a matter of principle, reconsidering Schengen. It's a matter of modernizing, taking the lessons of what is going on. Of course, Brexit is a consequence both of immigration difficulties and also the old feeling of the British that Europe is not exactly what they need. They've always been tempted by looking further and looking more towards the Atlantic than to look towards Europe. So it's an old temptation for the UK. Now we have to understand and to listen to what has been the message of the British people. We have to take the best out of it, try to find a good combination between the demand of the people and try to find a good relationship with EU. This will take time. This will make some changes, of course. For the City of London, I think this will introduce some changes, but we need to work all together in order to create a roadmap that will make things the easier possible, maintain the stability of Europe, and give perspective for both the European Union on one side and the UK on another side.
Continental Europe, the Middle East, as well as the place that connects Europe with Asia are all besieged and plagued by religious extremism. Now, by talking about the country that connects Europe and Asia, I'm referring to Turkey. Turkey has been kind enough to accommodate the needs of up to 2 million refugees. It deserves credit for doing that. Having said this, secularization of Muslims could be one effective solution to peaceful coexistence between the whites and the Muslims and different ethnic groups in the Middle East and indeed other parts of the world. Turkey, ironically, experienced a very dramatic coup attempt. The coup has been eased, and President Erdogan successfully took the situation under control. But what lessons can we draw from coup attempts in Turkey and other Muslim countries?
Well, that's effectively a big challenge. Turkey has gone through a lot of difficulties in the last year. Turkey's traditional policy was to have only friends as neighbors. And as a matter of fact, they had problems in the last 2 years with Russia, they had problems with Israel, they had problems with Syria. So it was a huge change in the Turkish situation.
But President Erdogan said a few years ago that he wanted to have zero problem on the periphery of his country, but he failed to do that.
Because the situation was so difficult in the region. And he had also some big, complicated domestic challenges, like the Kurd issue. So dealing with all these difficulty, and furthermore the refugee issue, having 2.2 million people, refugees in your country, this is a huge challenge. The hope of entering into the EU was of course important for the future of Turkey. This has been cooled down, and today the perspective is a much longer perspective if there is any possibility of entering with the EU. I think we need to try to stabilize as much as possible the situation both in the European Union and in the neighboring countries. The stability of the European Union cannot be considered just internally. To be stabilized internally, we need to stabilize all the regions around. That's why the relationship with Turkey is so important. The coup has been happening just a couple of days after reconciliation with Russia and reconciliation of Israel. As you justly mentioned, there has been an ongoing battle inside Turkey between Islamist forces and the one who are more secular. And the army has been representing a very traditional trend of secularism, the Kemalism, which of course can explain some movement inside the army and some preoccupation. Now I think that for the interest both of Turkey and the interest of Europe, as well as for the Middle East, we need stabilization, we need dialogue, we need reconciliation. The use of force, whether for a coup or whether for a military intervention, is not a solution. So I think that all the players, whether it's NATO, because Turkey is part of NATO, whether it's the EU in its relationship with Turkey, whether it's the regional players like Russia or the big countries of the Middle East, Iran on one side, Saudi Arabia on another side, we all need to work together in order to give perspective of more stability to this region. Because we have to understand that the Middle East is on fire. And when you have a fire, the risk of this fire growing and being out of control is the biggest risk we're facing. Today, Turkey is facing difficulty. What about if Saudi Arabia tomorrow faces difficulty? So it's a duty that we all have to contribute to lowering down the tensions, recreating dialogue inside each country for stability and between every country in order to have more moderation and appeasement going on in this part of the world.
We could clearly see your keen anxiety arising from the lorry attack as well as the coup in Turkey. Given the unpredictability and uncertainty that grip much of the Middle East. Do you think the prospects of having Turkey as one member state of the European Union will be a more remote and distant dream, namely very difficult to be made possible?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because from the start of the negotiation, Jacques Chirac as President of France and when I was Prime Minister, we have always been in favor of having Turkey on board, Turkey entering, or having the perspective of Turkey entering in Europe. Today, the situation of the public opinions and the position of most of member states of the European Union makes it much more difficult, or at least in a much longer term. And that's why we have all a duty, which is to respond to the needs of our people. Of course, the UK must address the preoccupation of its public opinion. We must address the rise of populism in our country. And this must show us, incline us to more responsibility. First step is to be able to reconquer our own economies. Unemployment is a huge problem. Immigration is also a huge problem, and the perception and the risk, the feeling of invasion for many European countries is very high today. We need to show through cooperation that we are back on track, back in an ability to control the situation, the economic situation, the social and refugee situation, and the diplomatic relationship with our country. Dialogue, more than ever, is the key for the European Union. Being able to dialogue in order to get the best way to monitor the Brexit, dialogue to have the best response of the refugee problem, and dialogue between France and Germany to find a path between austerity measures and, on the contrary, encourage growth and try to alleviate the suffering of the population in our countries. And of course, dialogue with Turkey and the countries of this region to have more stability. So the biggest problem today is to have each of us, each of our country, trying to find solution on its alone, trying to find solution each one on its side, without taking enough into account the needs of the other countries.
I'm afraid elsewhere in Europe, you're going to have another embarrassing dialogue. That is during the run-up to the formal departure of Britain from continental Europe. You have to discuss a lot of legislative things and lawful things to make sure that the process of disintegration, I'm sorry to use the word disintegration, will take place. Now, how do you assess the impact of the Brexit? Prime Minister David Cameron has paid the heaviest political price, and Prime Minister May has taken it over. She is known for the ruthlessness in the cabinet appointments. But with regard to continental Europe, what do you think of the future between the United Kingdom and the European Union?
Well, that's a big question mark, and that's in our hand. It depends on us to take the best out of it. To make sure that both we respond to the demand of the people of the UK, and that we try to find, each of us, Great Britain on one side, the European Union on another side, we really are able to put forward our own strategy. The strategy of Europe should be focused in creating more unity. Unity and addressing the problems and the anxiety of the people. That means economic response, that means response on immigration, and that means also a better policy towards the terrorist and security issue. On the UK side, I think what's important is to see how the UK wants to develop its financial and economic model. I think in a very natural way for the UK, the perspective of growing relationship with the Commonwealth, maybe growing relationship with Asia, might give them the possibility of expanding and developing their economy. Of course, there might be consequences on the financial sector, because the City of London should not be able to have the same capacity of development in its relation with Europe as it has in the past, because it wouldn't be part anymore of the European Union for the banking system, for the capacity of relationship of the financial system. This is going to create a big change. But we should find a way in order to make it as acceptable and as agreeable than possible, in respect again of what the people of Great Britain has decided. Of course, for the UK there is another big issue is how to maintain the unity, how Scotland is going to react. This also is a big issue. That's why when you talk about disintegration, you are right. But the biggest problem is for every country in Europe to avoid this problem of disunity, this problem of disaggregation of our own country. That's why we need to find common answers. That's why we need dialogue. And that's why we should be very careful in finding solutions and responses for our public opinions.
Thank you very much. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. de Villepin, former French Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. We're discussing the latest lorry attacks in Nice, as well as the coup attempt in Turkey. When we come back, we'll take a further look at the consequences arising from the Brexit, as well as how we look at the future of continental Europe. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back, sir. Do you believe the rise of populism will be more harmful for democracy? Because for transitional economy like those in China, we are following very closely this process. Whether populism is the bad form of democracy, how shall we look at the rise of populism on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean?
I think that in Europe, populism is growing mainly because of the difficulty in addressing from the elite, from the governments, in addressing the anxiety and questions of the general population. People feel that governments are not responding enough, not giving the right answer, not enough results on the economic sector, on the social issues, on immigration. So there is a need for concrete and fast answers to their problems. On the side of the US, I think that the situation might be a little different. Of course, the economy plays a big role, but also the society of the US is changing very fast. The balance between communities is also changing very fast. So all these changes are creating anxiety, are creating difficulties, and there is a need for the leaders to show continuity, to show ability to understand the messages coming from the people, and at the same time showing that they have options, they have solutions. And of course, none of us, neither the US, neither Europe, has in its own hand the capacity to find alone the answers. We need cooperation, we need more global governance, we need more imagination in finding these answers. That is the big challenge today. The wrong path, and that will be populism, is promises without answers and confrontation. Populism leads to confrontation, leads to hate, leads to violence, and leads to war. So if we are not going to stop this process, the risk is very high of confrontation and war.
Do you think the European Union itself will have more to think about, for example, reconstruction of the European Union?
Yes. We have two important challenges. One is how to create this Europe at 27 with new perspective, for example, in terms of security cooperation, for example, in terms of cooperation on immigration, but at the same time to go forward also in the Eurozone. The Eurozone is where there is the biggest wealth and biggest economic perspective in Europe. We should, with the country of the Eurozone, go further, taking new steps, having a budget, having a Minister of Finance, having a stronger integration, having a more harmonized policy on taxes, more harmonized policy on social issues. So we really should be able to address all together the big questions of Europe and show results. I think it's very important to understand that our countries, democracy or non-democracy, they need answers. And if they're not going to get answers, if they're not going to see that the decisions that are taken are going to make things better for them, and of course, then we will have a stronger problem.
Now, what do you think of the future between the United States and China, the two biggest economies, from your perspective, the European perspective?
Well, I think that there is a big misunderstanding between the two countries and a strong mishandling by the US of the relationship with China. I think there is a temptation in the US of having a strong policy of containment toward China. There is, of course, a fear about the growing economic capacity of China. There is some fear also about the growing military capacities of China. On the contrary, I think what we need is more dialogue, more understanding, and more cooperation. The more you will try to stop, control, or have some kind of negative policies, and this is and has been in the last decade the policy of the Western democracies. Sanctions, frozen conflicts, and containment. I don't think that these are the good answers. Have we found through sanctions and containment a better dialogue with Russia? On the contrary. So we need to change this policy, and we need to have in the US as well as in Europe people understanding that these are not options. You are taking the example of the situation in the South China Seas. What is the situation? We have some difficulties between nations in this region, Philippines and China, Vietnam and China. Dialogue should be the key. Direct dialogue between these countries in order to find in the bilateral framework, in order to find options and solutions to go forward, of course, in respect with the law of the sea, of the Convention of the Law of the Sea, respect of the freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight. China has been respecting these rules. So I think it's important to keep on with concrete solutions. If for any other reason we are entering in the logic of containment because we are afraid of China being too powerful, we will have more problems. We need China on board to tackle security issues. We need China on board to tackle peace issues in the UN. For example, China is the biggest contributor. So containment is not an option in a so broken and dangerous world we are living today. We need reconciliation, we need dialogue, and we need better understanding.
Thank you very much, Monsieur de Villepin.
Thank you so much.
At the end of this very enlightening dialogue, please give condolences to victims of the lorry attacks and the families who lost their loved ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your kind words. Thank you.